In part 2 of this module, we will create asset copies and multiple assets at a single time. We have just created a tank asset. We will now create a second tank asset that is a copy of the one just created. By copying an asset, the amount of data that needs to be entered is greatly reduced. When an asset is copied, all attributes of the source asset are copied to the new asset. Locate the asset in the hierarchy and click the right mouse button. From the menu that appears, select Copy and then Asset. A Copy an Asset dialog opens. The current site and the parent asset of the asset being copied appear in the dialog. You can change these if you want. For example, you may want to copy the tank asset to a different site or to a different branch in the hierarchy. Click the drop-down beside Site to select a different site. Click Browse to select a different parent asset. If the asset you are copying is a component location with installed components, you can create a copy of the installed components along with the component location. Enter the number of copies to be made. Click OK. A progress dialog appears. APM assigns unique asset numbers for each of the new copied assets. All the properties of the original asset are copied to the new asset. You may need to open the asset record and change characteristics such as asset name or serial number. Save the new asset and close the window. You can also copy an entire asset assembly. All of the attributes of the source assembly are copied to the new assembly. From the asset hierarchy, right-click the assembly to copy and select Copy Assembly. Just as when you copied a single asset, on the Copy Asset Assembly dialog, you can specify the site that owns the new assets, the top or parent asset, and the number of copies to make. You can also specify whether or not to create copies of any installed components. Click OK when you are ready to begin the copying. Expand the hierarchy to see the new assembly. Open the assets in the assembly and change the characteristics as may be required. When copying the asset and asset assembly from the physical hierarchy, you may have noticed several additional options for creating assets. In the hierarchy, you can create a new child asset and create a new asset that is a peer of the selected asset. You can insert an existing child asset to this position in the hierarchy. This moves the selected child asset to a new position in the hierarchy. It does not create a new asset. You can also change the parent asset of the selected asset. This changes the asset hierarchy but does not create a new asset. You can create multiple child assets at a single time. This allows you to add assets that are numbered sequentially but that are otherwise identical. Right-click an asset in the hierarchy and then select Create Multiple Child Assets from the menu. A Create Multiple Asset dialog opens. Enter the number of assets to create. You can specify names and numbers for the new assets. Specify the number for the first new item. If the number already exists, a 2 is added to the asset number. Then enter the value to increment the number on each subsequent item. If you want, you can set a prefix to each number. Specify the name for the new assets. If an asset name is not specified, the new assets are named. If you want, you can have the asset number inserted to the asset name. Specify whether it should be at the start or at the end of the name. In the Asset Details section, select values for the asset type, subtype if applicable, classification, consequence priority, function group, and material type. Enter an in-service date if it is known. On the Location and Description tabs, you can enter additional information for the new assets, just as we did when creating a new asset from scratch. When you are finished, click OK. The dialog closes, returning you to the physical hierarchy. The new assets appear in the hierarchy. In this module, you will have learned how to create a new asset from scratch. This was done from the site's Asset View Listing tab. You learned how to select values for the asset object, including asset type, and that a specification tab appears for the asset if the asset type allows subtypes. You have seen how manufacturer and purchase information is added to the asset. We have looked at barriers and how to include them on an asset. Working from the physical hierarchy, you have also seen how a single asset can be created as a copy of another asset and how an entire asset assembly can be copied. You have seen the various Create Asset options that are available when you right-click an asset in the hierarchy. These include Create a New Child Asset or a Peer Asset. And finally, you have learned how to create multiple child assets at a single time. This concludes the Creating an Asset topic.